It's been a long time, friends, but we had a conversation the other day about a meditation retreat that I went to with Deepak Chopra and his organization. And Seth and I had a conversation we thought it'd be helpful for everyone to listen to. Would love to know your thoughts in the comments and on the Facebook group. I hope everybody's doing well. We got school year wrapping up and we're heading into the summertime. I'm going to be traveling a lot this summer, but would love to hear you guys and what your thoughts are on the conversation. So without further ado, here's a conversation with Seth and I about meditation.
Well, we have not done a My Pilgrimage podcast in a long time. Do we want to make excuses for that and why? What have you been up to?
No, because we have crazy lives that go all over the place and they're awesome. They're awesome lives. But just for our three listeners out there, just so you guys know, we do think about it and we talk about doing it, and then we get topics and then we get busy again doing other things, and we do love it. But yeah, this was a long time coming. So
yeah. No, it's a busy life. It's been an amazingly beautiful, busy, and awesome time, and we can talk about like what's going on in our personal lives later on. But we wanted to share this. I spent 4.5 days with at the Wailea Marriott here for my birthday. My wife had gotten me a meditation retreat with Deepak Chopra, and it was a meditation immersion was the title of the retreat, and it happened to be on the island of Maui, and it happened to be right where we live and work, and it's 90 seconds from my office, and at the Wailea Beach Marriott, the Wailea Beach Resort, which is a Marriott hotel down there on the beach, beautiful hotel. And so I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to kind of share and discuss. And Seth, you've read a lot of Deepak stuff, and so I wanted a footnote for our Christian listeners, two of them. We are, this is not a thing to debate a theology of Christianity or whether something is right. If you find yourself going, well, that's not biblical, probably not the podcast for you in this situation. Because
I can't believe you're here.
Right. Yeah. Why are you here? We still do have a lot of, Christian listeners. I know it's hard for those Christians to understand. I still call myself a Christian. I'm just not, I guess what you could call it. I'm not what you could call an evangelical Christian in terms of the theology of the things. My theology is different, but I'm still a follower of Jesus Christ, and I still hang out with him every day, just about. So anyway, so I got a chance to go down to the retreat. It was kind of an interesting thing because it was over a weekend, but it was actually a Friday through Tuesday, and ended at around noon, 1 o'clock on a Tuesday. And you really get dropped in the deep end right off the bat. We went in Friday, and it was an incredibly packed schedule for a retreat like this. I think I had been thinking, it's Maui, so they'll build in some beach time. They'll build in some, activity time. Hey, the afternoon, take a couple hours and go snorkeling or whatever. But no, that was not it. No, instead it was like, you're going to meditate for, it starts off with more sunrise meditation, and then an hour of yoga, and then breakfast, and then right into like another hour of meditation. Then it was teaching. It's the teachings were coming out of the Vedanta, which is these Vedic teachings. These are 6,000 to 8,000 years old, coming through the Hindu tradition, but not like a straight up Hindu thing. But it was Sanskrit mantra meditations. And then teaching out of the Bhagavad Gita and out of the ancient Vedic teachings. There was a Ayurvedic doctor there. There was a guy who doing sound immersion, who created like sound baths, which are amazing. So for meditation, which was amazing. And then in Deepak, of course, the chief meditation officer at his organization, at the Chopra organization, is a guy named Roger Gabriel, who's doing a lot of the hosting. And then Deepak himself, of course, doing tons and tons of teaching, lesson meditations, and his approach is quite different than Roger's was, because Deepak didn't really mess around when he would lead us in meditation. He'd just go, okay, so we're going to start the meditation now. You just, and people would just be looking at going, okay, nobody's gonna ring a bell or anything like that. Okay, all right, here we go. And you just jump in, whereas like Roger would be like, begin by closing your eyes, and he'd walk you through it. And, we start off with the mantra, and he would do that whole thing. But Deepak was just, nope. It was hilarious. The first time he did it, everybody just was watching him. He's, and I looked at Maria and I go, I guess we're just, and actually, it's funny. I preferred that after looking back on the retreat. I remember going, he was very much the spiritual teacher that was like, you know how to do this, just do it. Kind of thing,
yeah, right.
Don't
do or do not.
He was constantly don't overthink it. Don't overthinking it. It was that kind of thing. It seemed to be a theme of his teaching, especially the last day on Tuesday. He did a 2-hour Q&A where he just took questions. And there was a box, and you could write a question during the week, whatever, during the weekend, and put it in the box, and he would answer those questions. And on the last day, he just started going through cards, right? So he's like, I have been on Zoom for a year and a half, and I am burning out. What should I do? And he's like, stop. Next card. And everybody started laughing, and he goes, what? Don't do it. Because stop doing it. It was very funny.
Except for the one person that probably wasn't laughing was when they asked the question, because they're just like, that's not an option. Okay, they got a million reasons why they can't just do the thing they need to do.
Okay, exactly. Okay, so before we get into
I get that all the time with clients. Man.
Totally. Before we get into the core of kind of what I wanted to just kind of talk about, that we're going to have a discussion on the levels of consciousness, because that was the core of his teaching. I mean, he got into quantum fields, quantum mechanics. I mean, I can't, honestly, I have just pages and pages of notes, and I can't really, I mean, there's 10 podcasts here easily. But today we'll focus on the levels of consciousness and the different reactions, he said, that come out of those spaces of consciousness, which were really interesting. But the thing that has to be said, and that is really interesting, and I think that some people might experience it, and it became crystal clear for me, was that if you are on a level of consciousness, let's say you are a person who is what we could describe as waking up. You've gone from maybe a very driven, success-driven consciousness. Maybe as an evangelical Christian, it's about just finding success and doing the right thing, and you've been in that space trying to please the epic sky dad God. And you've been trying to do that, but then one day you start to realize that it's not bringing you peace, or it's not bringing you happiness, and then you begin what we've called deconstruction. That's the beginning of waking up, where you begin to your ego stories begin to fall apart a bit, and you start to wake up that way, right? You're at a level of consciousness, but you cannot understand. It's very hard to understand someone who's more expanded than that. Right. Sure. So if you're sitting here and you're listening to Deepak, and it reminds me of Jesus talking to his disciples, right, and just getting frustrated. How long do I have to be with you guys? Because it was just that frustrating experience of trying. That's why he spoke in parables, to try and teach these very, very deep understandings of how the universe actually works. And and
there's an important caveat there, because even when you say understand, to what Jesus said, remember, in seeing they may not see. Mm-hmm. Right, to confound the wise. So what he's saying is, understanding is not something that can be done with the ego. Mm-hmm. Information can come in, right? There can be an informational understanding, but what he was trying to say was, like, in seeing they would not see. Yeah. So, like, to understand, like, so someone right here might be able to understand. They listen to Deepak say something about unity consciousness and we are one. Well, I read The Power of Now, and I've been meditating, and yeah, I get it. There's that now. And I can be in that, and they can have an understanding, but you can only understand it from the level of consciousness you occupy.
Yes.
And of course, the ego, the first 10 years of your journey is your ego becoming enlightened for the most part.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. He's like, he was explaining that the ego is there to build the story, right? Yeah. To build the story of And so when you come into a new, more expanded space, he goes, and your ego comes along and then begins to build a story around that. And he goes, and at any point you can kind of hold. He said, he goes, and he was talking about these levels of consciousness and saying, you know, you can experience unity consciousness in the same day that you experience complete ignorance. And he said, you know, he says, you can go in the same day. He says, in the same hour. He goes, in the same minute. He goes, you can fly back and forth through those spaces. He says, the idea through practices are what allow us to become more and more stable in spaces, right? Spiritual practices are what allow us to maintain a space and begin to experience life at a certain space, right? He said, if we have no practice, we have no things, because then we are just like a feather in the wind, you know, just blowing around, and wherever the wind's going to take us is where we're going to end up. And he goes, it can be very unstable. And he says, people can have psychotic breaks by experiencing unity consciousness and going straight back into their ego, you know? And it was fascinating. He did a whole talk about that kind of stuff. He was talking about psychedelics and how he goes, this is why we don't use psychedelics recreationally. He says, if you use, he goes, this is how you can have a psychotic break, because it takes you into a space that you are not prepared to understand. And your ego is not prepared to build a story for. And
good friend of mine just did a journey. The mother of a friend of mine that died.
Yeah.
She's just been trapped in extreme grief for months and months and months and months. And and her healer guy just said, well, I think we're going to take you into a deep dive of psilocybin to help you with your grief. And I'm just like, that's just not a good idea. It was just a terrible idea, because she's completely ego identified. Completely ego identified.
Yeah.
And of course, I texted her a few days after the journey and said, how'd it go? She goes, I think I was massively traumatized. It was horrible. It was an absolute nightmare. I'm like, yeah, of course it was. Like,
yeah,
you know, and unless your ego cannot handle that type of input.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Your ego's whole job is to interpret energies coming from the ethereal planes and from your own subconscious, and to create a cohesive narrative out of it. And when you do that kind of work with psychedelics, it's like you're cracking open Pandora's box fully and asking the ego to interpret that, because you're still an egoic being completely.
Yeah. Right.
That's what a psychotic break is. That's why my buddy Josh, man, I remember he called me. He's over at Washington State University hunting for a girl that he went to high school with, because he knew she was a virgin, and if he could sleep with her, he could bring in the second coming of Christ. And the thing is, he was doing a ton of weed. He was smoking a ton of weed, and the weed was opening up all this stuff, and it was too much for his ego to handle, because he had no separation. He was super young. And the thing that was funny is, and what he was saying was completely true. He's like, listen, I know this sounds crazy, and I know it doesn't make any sense to you, but this will happen. And I'm like, I know this sounds crazy, Josh, but it won't. But you have two guys going, I know this sounds crazy. You know what I mean? That's the thing, is it's just because the ego is just like trying to piece it all together. That's why a midlife crisis comes in typically in the mid 30s, mid 40s, early 40s, is because by then there's so many balls that you're trying to juggle. Life is so complex that the ego it can't handle that level of input complexity.
Right.
And so there has to be a break, and you have to have a more advanced operating system to come on board, which is what spirit is.
Yeah.
You know, it's fascinating. Man.
Yeah. Before we move further, let's go into this thing on the I'll just sum it up real quick. Is that the teaching through Vedic teaching, that and then Deepak's definitely this is through his interpretation. He has his own thing, right? It's not just straight up, here's how the Hindus teach it. Deepak, being a spiritual teacher on the level that he's at, is interpreting through his own meditation and his work. And so he's created his own kind of platform and understanding. And a lot of what his thing can be summed up as a melding of Vedic teaching and quantum physics. And he literally just come from Dubai, flew all the way to Maui, and then now he's in Davos. You know, I invited him to come on the boat, and he says, I'm so sorry. I says, that sounds like so much fun. He's like, I have to leave. And I'm like, oh, we're going to Davos for the world thing, you know? And I'm just like, oh, he's on the cutting edge, but he's like hanging out with the physicists in the Hadron Collider kind of stuff, he's there doing that kind of work and doing like intense studies. Like they're doing huge data studies on psychedelics and on especially on breath work in meditation, dealing with and then with physics, like the whole biological responses to meditation, like all the real good data that's coming out on terms of physiological response to meditation and yoga is coming out of the Chopra Institute. It's really interesting what they're doing. But okay, just to kind of start, he talked about different states of consciousness, and let's just talk about this a bunch. He said he talks about the first level, when it's a little bit different, I think, than he did in the rabbit hole video he did years ago. He switched it just a bit, because he used to talk about how there was the first state is deep sleep, right? Right. He's actually flipped that. He says that the lowest state of consciousness is what he called the waking state, when you're awake, when you wake up from sleep. And
that's probably more helpful, just because at least you have some say in what's going on down
He
there.
said the second level is dream state, and the third level is deep sleep state.
So he sees the dream state as a more conscious state than the waking state.
Yes, he does. Yeah, and he sees deep sleep state as the even more conscious and more a better in terms of a healing, because he said that the data that we have is that all of healing and integration and body healing and biological healing and even like the psychological healing is happening. So much of it's happening in the deep sleep state. He says, so sleep and quality of sleep and quality of deep sleep has become very important in his practice and in his work, where he's talking about and he's really focused on helping people get better sleep. He said a lot of what they do dietarily is focused on giving us better sleep, right? One of the things that I've really kind of focused on my own life is I've started to notice that if I drink too much alcohol, I don't sleep well. I just don't. And especially if I drink a certain amount of alcohol late at night or in the evening, I've found that after, I'd say about 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, if I drink more than 2 or 3 glasses of wine or something like that, if I'm poker night or whatever, we're doing whiskey or whatever, that night it's horrible. My sleep's just bad. It's just bad quality. And I wake up tired and groggy and stuff like that. But more importantly, he says, your cells are not getting enough time to heal and to replicate in a healing way. He says because your entire physiological, all the functions of your body are less efficient. I mean, everything, digestive and your organ health, your liver, everything, your brain. He said, so you're literally like taking away from years of your life. And I was like, whoa, wow. So he's like, really, that's become a big part of what they do, is helping people sleep better. And to that end, during the retreat, I just slept like a rock. It was amazing. And I have since
and I can attest to that, dude. I've done so much integration and healing work in dream state and in sleeping state. And you're absolutely right. Like there's so much integration that happens in a deep sleep.
Right. You know? So he's saying the lowest level of consciousness, the base level of consciousness, is just the waking state. And it's the vast majority of humanity walking around, going to McDonald's, getting a haircut, that kind of thing. Right.
Yeah.
And I'll get into some of what he says, the different kind of reactions of these different states, when we encounter things in these states. After deep sleep, he said the next state is called soul. He called it soul consciousness, right? It's when we become aware. And this isn't, and for those of you who haven't, maybe you're probably sitting here right now going, okay, which state am I in? Don't worry about that. And he was, when he was going through this, it was interesting because he's watching this
classic waking state thinking.
Right. He's watching this audience and he says, and he just stopped. He goes, don't get attached to this. He goes, I can see you. He goes, especially you type A people, just jump at which state am I in? Which state am I? He goes, don't attach to this. He goes, this is not something to attach to. But soul consciousness being that first kind of what you could say spiritual awakening, where you really go, you come into a space where you meet and you have an encounter with your own soul, where you go, oh, this body is not me. I am the observer of my experience. I am not the experience. I am the observer of my body. I'm not my body. I'm the observer of my thoughts. I'm not my thoughts.
We can say effectively that is the main goal of most good therapy.
Yes,
to turn you into the
absolutely
observer, to bring you,
and even what you could call like a non-spiritual therapy, where it's doing talk therapy or whatever. It's to create that self-awareness, right?
Yeah,
I think that is when there is a spiritual component to it, it's really helpful. I think it's actually much more helpful than just self-awareness.
Yeah,
unless
because the ego becoming aware of itself the ego is capable of being aware of itself.
Yeah.
I have a lot of clients come in, they're just hyper self-aware, but it's an egoic awareness. So it's an understanding of self where you can explain all your garbage and everything that your mom did to you. And you go, great. But that's actually not awareness.
Right.
Awareness is the ability to step back without judgment and observe that thinker doing all that thinking.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times I'll ask somebody, how are you feeling? And you can tell they're thinking about feeling.
Right. Yeah. And that's a lot of psychoanalysis, right? A lot of psychoanalysis is just ego, becoming aware of ego and being able to explain everything.
Yeah.
Which
an enlightened ego. How do you say there's nothing worse than an enlightened ego?
Exactly. Really, I have a lot of friends, highly educated PhDs, that kind of stuff like that. Incredibly enlightened egos. And it's not and please understand, for those listening, for all three of you, you need to understand that we are not, we're not putting them down or talking down at them. When we say this kind of stuff and say an enlightened ego, we're saying that's a normal thing. We've both experienced that as well. And everybody, that's a normal kind of state. I think between waking state and coming to soul consciousness, everyone's going to experience that part where the ego is trying to have that. And so, but some people, I think a lot of humanity gets really, I mean, these are your politicians and your other, your professors and stuff like that. You get to a point where you can.
And what you see it described as the woke culture that's happening now, kind of that left side liberal.
Yeah, woke culture
is an enlightened egoic state. Yeah. Right. Which is one of the reasons why the waking state people over here, and we get pissed about that, because it's actually the same thing.
Yeah, it's just
functioning, but it's just functioning a different thing. But it's where you get really pissed off, stressed out liberals. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
That are just like those, and then the other ones that call the waking state people idiots. Like they're morons. They're just stupid.
Right, yeah.
But true soul consciousness, Deepak's describing, right, is stepping back and being able to observe all that.
And you have to see both and go, oh. And this is a lot of your people go, I don't really want to deal with politics. I don't deal with politics. And there's a place even to go above that. So the next, he talks about cosmic consciousness, and it's when you become aware of kind of essentially our place in the universe, the space in the universe, and how you start to feel the inconsequentiality of the human race, and start to kind of connect with that higher space. The next level up after that, he calls divine consciousness. It's when you become very aware of, I guess, spirit in the world, and that this is where a lot of manifestation begins, where a person can begin to really manifest, just boom, 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 because you start to understand how the universe works in terms of that active creation of the universe. And then the final level he calls unity consciousness, and it's where everything melts away, right? Unity consciousness, everything, you see the matrix essentially, and nothing becomes important. Nothing emotionally weighs on you. Nothing means anything. Everything loses meaning, and everything is meaningful at the same time. And so
you see Jesus trying to describe this to his disciples a lot. He's trying to go, this is where I'm at, and that's where I'm trying to get you to. I and the Father are one.
Right.
And they're all going, what?
Right. And so it's a wonderful thing, because if you start to look at Jesus' teachings from that perspective, what you see is, and Deepak's teachings were the same way. And it was really interesting, because as he's going through this stuff, trying to help people understand, he'd stop and he'd go, do I still have you? Are you listening? And frankly, no, he was losing a lot of people. Like one of the real pieces of feedback I got from a lot of people that I met at the retreat was like that they were just like, I came here thinking I was going to, they don't know what he's talking about. And it was hard for them to follow.
They're enlightened egos were struggling with it.
Right. And so and that's
a lot of enlightened egos would go to a retreat like that.
Right.
Because they're going and looking for the next thing that will give them the next piece of truth that will make them happy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it struck me as someone who's traveled throughout the ancient Christian world, and that all of what we see in Christian religion and all of what we see in Buddhism and in Islam and stuff like that is the Western egos trying to interpret teachings of people experiencing, these teachers that were experiencing unity and consciousness. Jesus is the evangelical theology is 100%, and Catholic theology is 100%. These feeble waking state egos trying to interpret these teachings and apply them because they're not really understanding. Like when Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, no one comes to the Father except through me. How an ego interprets that is, oh, he's the gatekeeper of heaven, salvation, and these very concrete places and stuff like that. And they're, and every time I'll
which is one of the reasons why we can be critical of teachers' language, because we can go, that's not helpful. But it's also the problem when you try to take a 2,000-year-old limited text, that was written 60 to 100 years after the guy said the thing, and go and try to understand it.
Exactly. Like that teaching, the one that we have in the book of John, we have it's 110 years after the time of Christ. And not only that, it was written 110 years later, but it also, when Jesus said it, he was alive. And I always tell people to say that. I go, well, so what do you interpret that to mean? Well, he's saying that, that you have to believe, you have to be a Christian. I go, so you have to believe in the death and resurrection of Christ and stuff. Yes. Okay, great. I said, well, you notice he was still alive when he said it, though he wasn't dead.
Right.
And they'll go, well, I go, and he didn't actually in the teaching there, he didn't reference his death or resurrection or what was going to happen or how the prayer of salvation was going to work or how any of your theology wrapped around that was going to work at all. He didn't explain any of it. He was simply giving a teaching. So what do you think that the people sitting in the room at the time, how would they interpret that teaching, considering that they didn't know he was going to die and he wasn't explaining that he was going to die? So he wasn't laying out any of the theology that you pertain to, that you're adding onto this teaching and saying that's what it means. And they'll go, and you'll go, okay, great. This is the perfect example of an enlightened being teaching something to these lower consciousness and us for thousands of years trying to interpret it. It doesn't make sense.
Right. Remember, Einstein said, you can't solve a problem on the same level of consciousness that created the problem.
Yes.
Right. And then there's that kind of reverse thing.
No, Einstein didn't actually say that, but yes, it's been attributed to him. It's all over the internet's attributed to Einstein, but yeah.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Well, some dude said it.
Yeah, somebody said it, and Deepak said it like 5 or 6 times. He kept saying,
right.
I'm trying to solve the problem at the same level.
Yeah.
It's been created.
Well, and that's the thing is, even then, like you having a conversation with someone about something like that,
right?
Who's in a waking state of consciousness, it's pointless. This is that's the whole cast your pearls before swine. Man, I was having lunch with her mom the other day. Right. She told me, well, so at some point you and your brother are going to finally come to your real true calling in Christ. And I'm like, Mom, we're never going to believe that stuff again. Well, believe what stuff? Protestant Christian theologies. I don't know what you're talking about when you say that. So, Mom, I said, David and I are both Christians. I'm just a follower of a more ancient form. She goes, well, there's nothing more ancient than the Bible. I go, well, yes, I understand it, but your interpretation. I know, right? Right. And your interpretation of that, and she goes, the Bible interprets itself, right? Which is literally out of the Enlightenment came that concept, and it's just we're going to close the loop on this level of consciousness. The Bible interprets itself.
You're talking about the actual historical thing they call the Enlightenment period in history.
Yeah, the Enlightenment period, about 250, 300 years ago, which is where most like what we would call kind of these Western American theological structures come from.
Yeah, it came from that time. Yeah.
And but it's funny, the Bible interprets itself. Like I go, it's not a thing. She's like, well, I go, it's not a thing. A piece of paper can't interpret a piece of paper. It's not a thing. Right. That's just not a thing. But of course, all that energy that I'm giving to this conversation is completely wasted.
Yes.
Because
and that whole kind of it's funny because the concept pearls before swine is it's somewhat derogatory, right? I like Deepak's kind of version of that. Yeah, it's very Jewish. Yeah, I like the Deepak's kind of version of that is you're not helping them.
Yeah.
He just says
that was going to be my next question. Right. I was curious, did Deepak address when we talk about these levels of consciousness? Okay, so Carl Jung says no one comes to consciousness without suffering. Suffering is the catalyst that drives us to the point where one level of consciousness begins to dissolve and we elevate or expand into a new level.
Yes.
And I'm curious if Deepak talked about that at all. Did he talk about suffering? Did he talk about what brings people to that space, how that works, and how maybe that's shifting on the planet? Like, you know what I mean?
Yes, he did at length.
Okay.
Man, God, that's so much. I just opened my notebook with all my notes and I went, oh man.
Well, and he's written how many books? 82 books, something like that.
He's almost 100 books. He's got one coming out on yoga at the end of this year.
He's money coming out.
He's writing constantly and he's teaching constantly. Like he's spending it. He's 75 years old. He walks around like he's in his 30s. He's like,
He's talked about how the aging process can be slowed down, right?
Yeah, oh, yeah. We talked about that at length. He was talking about self-awareness and these different levels of awareness, and how when we're at a certain level of consciousness, how we experience different things through we experience everything. So for instance, if you're eating an apple, right, and you are at you can't eat an apple in the deep sleep state, right? You can eat an apple at the waking state though, and you'll eat it as if you're in a waking state, the lowest, and in this kind of structure, this lowest level of consciousness, you'll be eating the level of you'll be chewing on it, and you won't be even experiencing the apple. Your mind's somewhere else. You're thinking about work. You're thinking about your kids. You're thinking about your baseball team. You're going through and you're just eating the apple in the waking state. So your experience is essentially null. And it derives, and then he's like, so it derives very little benefit. Biologically, it derives less benefit. We know that. They have studies now that say, so when you're eating something unconsciously in the waking state, you're getting less nutrition from it. Your digestion is not as efficient. You're actually the same apple. If you're in a soul consciousness state, right, when you wake up, you're going to derive more nutrition from it. You're going to digest it better. It's going to actually be a more beneficial thing to your body. In terms of, right. And then he started talking about how like cosmic consciousness and going over, he goes, eating that same apple, with divine consciousness. Now that apple, eating the apple with cosmic consciousness is actually benefiting the whole world. He says, eating the apple with divine consciousness is manifesting things. It's creating things, because eating apple with unity consciousness, because you're not eating it. There is no apple. Right? There is no spoon.
There's no spoon.
Yeah. And so
it's funny. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Well,
I was going to say, I had a little story, because like when I was at this, I went to this retreat with John Philip Newell at one point, and I was up at a Buddhist site up in the Rocky Mountains, this place, and there was this temple called the Great Stupa of Dharmakaya.
Yeah.
And I think I probably told this story before, but it was really interesting, because there was this guy named Israel, and he was the guy that lived there at this Buddhist place, and he was kind of in charge of the grounds. And so our group, on the last day, I had meditated inside the temple, inside the stupa, and it was just unbelievable. I mean, I just never felt a vibration like that before. And the last day, we only had a little bit of time left, and so I ate my breakfast really fast, and I'm over there and I'm tying my shoes, and I'm gonna hike up to the stupa, and Israel's just sitting there sipping his coffee, and he's looking at me, he's like, "Where are you going?" I'm like, "I'm going up to the stupa, just one more time, just to." And he goes, "Oh, right on." And I go, "Do you live here, right?" And he goes, "Yeah." I go, "Is that like a regular part of your practice, going up there?" And he goes, "Oh no." He goes, that's a nice little power plant out there." But he goes, "The coffee is the practice." I said, "The food is the practice." Right. I'm like, fuck. Of course it's good. He's literally like, you can see, it's just mindfully sipping, and he could see his attention was with his coffee. Right. And I'm like, gotta run up to the awesome power plant. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I totally know what you mean. And it's interesting, because I can see, one of our 3 listeners is probably right now going, "Oh, whoa, I just ate my breakfast. I didn't even remember. I don't remember it, because I blazed right through it. And now you don't feel bad about it. The next time you have anything, like, you can go get a single almond, and you can eat it consciously, you can start to go, and you can just start to notice the energy that exists inside that thing. And you can have a cosmic conscious experience with an almond. It's just a matter of where's your attention. Where do you put your attention? Where does the focus go to? I wanted to go over this one thing that he talked about. He did this lecture called Into the Mystery of Mysteries. And this was his last major lecture that he did. And he did it for almost 3 hours. And it was, and
the mystery of mysteries.
The mystery of mysteries. He was talking about 7 types of biological responses. So we have these states of consciousness that are very helpful. But he also talked about how the humans have these 7 different levels of reaction. And, so like these are the biological responses. He said on the lowest level of the lowest level of human consciousness is, and this isn't, deep sleep, because obviously when you're in deep sleep, dream state, you can experience some of these things, but not running the show, not consciously running the show. He talked about the lowest level being fight or flight, right? The caveman response, the fight or flight response, and how he goes, and how so much of humanity is in that state. He goes, if you're poor, if you're in places, you fight or flight. If you're in war, if you're in battle, he goes, but even if you're in traffic, the fight or flight response.
Yeah. Well, and even you'll get wealthy people that just live with so much trauma within them that
Right.
they live constantly in the fight or flight, but they just live at they're the ones that are the billionaires that are hoarding money,
Yes.
things like that.
He actually said all stress is a fight or flight response.
Yeah,
All
I agree
stress.
with that completely. Yeah.
He said, so if you're
I get
experiencing
people all the time going, well, I'm just really stressed out. Like, okay, you keep using that word. Like, let's
right.
talk about that.
Well, he was like, if you're experiencing stress, you're in the fight or flight response. He says that plain and simple. He was talking about his teacher, his Vedic teacher, Maharishi, the guru in India. And he said one time he was with Maharishi, and Maharishi said to him, in Hindi, he was like, Deepak, what is this word stress? What is this? And he's like, he's trying to explain to him what stress is. And he goes, and Westerners have stress. And he goes, people, he goes, so stress. And he's like, oh, he goes, that's a funny story to tell, he's saying, because he said, stress is 100% a story. And he illustrated it by saying, on the way here, he goes, let me tell you the story of on the way here. He says, I came here from Dubai. He says, we're on a flight from Dubai. And he said, we're flying over. He says, and again, the pilot gets on and says, he goes, and it'd been a bit of a rough flight. And he said, he gets on the plane. And he says, we've lost an engine. And they're like, oh, everything's fine. We lost an engine. Everything's fine. Everybody stay calm. And he says, and it's a Emirates flight, right? He says, so there's like 17 different languages spoken on the plane. And he goes, and there's like 17 different languages spoken in the crew. It's a very, very diverse group of people coming out of Dubai. And he said, he continued to get rough, and several minutes later, the pilot goes, we've lost a second engine, but everything is doing just fine. Because they lost 2 engines. And he says at this time, he says, he's very much going, I am going into I can feel the stress of it. And he says, and he goes, the stewardess walks by, and he says to the flight attendant, he says, can we just land? He goes, because they said they were turning around and going back to Dubai. They were 2 hours into the flight. Because we're going back to Dubai. Because can't we just land somewhere? Because there's got to be an airport between here and Dubai. And she says, we're over Ukraine. and he goes, and we're going in and he goes, we can't land in Ukraine or Russia, so we have to go back to Dubai. We're going to go back to Dubai. And he said he sat down and he was like, and then I realized, he goes, this stuff that I teach, because it really works. He says, I sat down and I observed. I just breathed. I observed what is this story that my ego is crafting right now is telling me. And he goes, and I just switched it, that I was on a Disney World ride instead. He goes, and then I had a lot of fun. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
And
I call it the story game. I play it with clients sometimes. When somebody comes in and starts telling me negative stories, I'll just immediately counter with the opposite of the. And I had this one kid one day, he was doing that about some girl. Well, what if she doesn't text me back? I go, what if she does? He goes, I don't even think she knows I exist. I go, she's probably thinking about you right now. Like, I just kept doing that. And eventually he goes, what are you doing? I go, I thought we were playing the story game. And he's like, like, your stories suck, man. It was so much better.
Exactly. And when he was telling the story, everybody was laughing, but again, half the audience is going, well, you were in real danger. Like they're missing the teaching, right? Because they're stressed out for him. They
may not see.
Yeah. They're stressed. They're super stressed out for him.
Yeah.
Another story. One day, Deepak wouldn't hang out unless he was teaching or leading us in a meditation. He wouldn't hang out with the group. He would go back to his hotel room. Well, no, I think it was because he's coming from Dubai. He's going to Davos and he's doing all these experiences, and he needs to rest and meditate and be in his own
every retreat, man. They always, like, even with JP, he was just like, I only got this much energy.
Yes. And that's the thing. If he stepped off the stage, everybody's doing this, and they want a piece of him, right? They want a piece.
And more enlightened people always are very aware of their capacity.
Yes. And he was, and you could see that, like, as soon as he was done, his assistant would come and they would walk out, and he would go back to his hotel room, because I followed him one day early on. I was like, sneak out to see where he's going. And he was going to his hotel room. That's a picture I took of, right behind him.
Yeah.
He's a little guy, he's a little guy.
I've met him twice. I met him briefly, I got a book signing. But,
very cool. Very cool.
He did the thing. Like, almost knocked me over.
Yeah, right.
That was pretty cool.
I shook his hand and I was like, oh, yeah. Anyway, he the story was, so he was a little bit late coming into the room, He was back in the hotel room or whatever. And when that would happen, Roger would be up there and say, well, Deepak's I'll just take, anybody have any pressing questions? And hands would go up and hands go up, And this one woman stands up and immediately she's like, she was African-American. She's like, okay, so I'm doing all the meditation stuff and I'm doing all the mantras and I'm like, I got that box checked. I'm good. She said, but I'm like, what do I do in a world, I'm a Black woman, and what do I do in a world where people hate Black people and people hate women? Because like, well, how do I even deal with that? Poor Roger, he's this white guy who spent most of his life in India, and he's like, oh, that's just a story that's being told. And the whole room goes,
you can't say that.
yeah. And it was really interesting because he really shouldn't have said that, because it was the wrong answer, because he was in his own space. And after Deepak was done with his teaching, he came back up and apologized for that. He said, I realized that I gave a teaching that was not helpful. He said that you were asking a question and your understanding of that question is important for me to understand. And he was very, very, and he went and readdressed the question from her perspective and said, these are things, real things. He says, and understanding now what we're talking about, you're understanding your experience is this. He says, we want to help you have a better story of your experience as a Black woman. He said, but right now, this is definitely what you're experiencing. And many people are experiencing that, it was kind of beautiful. But there was so much of that, so many people, you saw it was 90% women there. Again, you go to any yoga class, it's 90% women. These women are as traditionally a more oppressed group of people, but also more sensitive, more connected in many ways. Yeah,
and the feminine energy walks closer to the ground.
Yeah, and
they say it walks by moonlight. That's
right.
what they call it in the Celtic world. The feminine walks by moonlight.
Right. Oh, that's powerful.
And so they see the sun before the rest of the world.
Yeah. And so it's all these women trying to heal themselves and heal the world and heal each other and heal all the wrongs and everything like that. And a lot of people just getting frustrated because Deepak is basically saying, heal yourself. Do this work, meditate.
Crucify him.
Yeah, like another one of the questions that came up, Q&A. I fully understand that meditation is important and can help me reach my goals.
But
so why do I have such a hard time making time for it?
I fully understand.
Yeah.
That's a funny phrase.
And he's like, and you would see Deepak, just these little shakes of the head, and then he says, you simply have other priorities. He says, that's it. He goes, if you have other priorities that are a higher priority than meditation, then that's what you do. And he says, he goes, and that's okay. He said, for me, he says, my practice comes first. He says, above everything, in front of everything. And he says, so I don't miss my meditations because it's my highest priority. And I was like, okay, the gap from that person who asked the question to where Deepak at is pretty massive. And I want to explain more about that maybe towards the end. But let me talk about.
Well, and let me say real quick, just for the Christians, for the one of the three is a Christian. So this is the interpretation.
Or for our Christian listener.
For our Christian listener, this is the teaching when Jesus says, when he said, let the dead bury the dead, right? When I say, I must go bury my mother and father, let the dead bury the dead, you come follow me, right? He was always asking people, right? Sell everything you have, give it to the poor, come follow me. All of it, that's always that. I mean, the first thing we were taught at White Raven Center when we first started healing was, this is the most important thing in the whole world.
Yes.
Unless healing is more important to you than even your children,
right?
Then you're not ready.
Right. And that's such a hard teaching because, that's also the cult leader says, this cult is the more, I am more important than your family, right? It's the manipulated space, that's what I love about like someone who's teaching you about your meditation practice, because it's yours, it's not me, coming to the ashram is the most important thing, or coming to the church is the most important thing. I remember I've had many Christian friends all the time. No, you got to get to church, man. You really got to get to church. And I remember my buddy in New Mexico told me, you're not coming to church. You really need to start coming to church. And I said, why? I go, I was like, Pastor Rob is like, I play basketball with that guy every Tuesday, and it's like,
I got more one-on-one time with him than
yeah,
anybody.
exactly. I'm like, why? And he's not even good at preaching. I said, why would I go sit for an hour and listen to a guy that like has nothing to tell me? It's like, that doesn't make any sense. Anyway, let me go back. So we had talked about stress, fight or flight response. He said the second response, they call the reactive response, the ego response, is manipulation, power plays, control, addictive behavior. These are the people that are finding all this material success, right? They're chasing money. Got to do it. You got to get there. He said many people that are successful in religious institutions, in the church, in the synagogue, and they said they're just, they have money, and he goes, they've succeeded professionally. He said, and he goes, but they get there and he gets, ultimately, if that doesn't satisfy them and they are not happy, and they continue to seek. He said, because we move from those, he goes, often from that fight or flight response, the stress response, to that next level of response where we're finding success by we're reading the Tony Robbins book, we're getting motivational stuff, and we finally bust through, and we celebrate those people like crazy in our society, because it's like that person just went from this to that, and they went from this to now they're the CEO. That I was reading this morning, this guy, grew up in an abusive home, and then he became a Navy SEAL. And they're like, yeah, and responding, and that's in not putting that down at all, but that level, like, as in like, oh, he read it. But if I was to hang out with that guy and go, okay, now what? Right now what? Oh, you made it to Navy SEAL. Now what? You're going to keep chasing those things. He said that then, because we move from there to the restful awareness response. He says, if you get to that now what thing in reactive response, I'm still not happy. Now we move to restful awareness. He said the Chitta Shakti, he talked about inner calm in the midst of chaos, conflict, where we start to find that's that awakening state, that first soul consciousness, where we start to go, oh, okay. And you'll meet people, some people that are very wealthy and stuff like that, but they don't live like that, and you was talking to them, it's, I did live like that, and it just didn't do anything for me. So now I've come to this other space where I'm like finding all this peace and quiet, and I realize this is just more important. He said very quickly after that is what they call the intuitive response, right? Where synchronicity, knowingness sets in, the spontaneous right action, spontaneous knowing, spontaneous, just kind of like, where you start to go, you start to see the synchronicity in the world, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. I had a very synchronistic thing happen a couple of days ago. I got a message from an old boss of mine, who's actually the administrator at the school I taught in New Mexico. And he was on the island. He'd been on Kaikanani, it turns out. And I was like, what? He goes, yeah, we're on the island. We'd love to see it. And he's like, well, I'm going to be, I was like, well, where are you guys? He said, we're going to be at Maui Winery at 2:30 doing a wine tasting. I was like, that's pretty close to where I'm at. I said, I'll come over and say hi. And I poke over there, and the whole thing is just feeling synchronistic. I don't even know why. It's not like, is he going to hand me a check for $1 million? No, it's like, we're over there going, I know I'm supposed to be here saying hi to you. I have no idea why still. But it felt like that, right? It's this intuitive response of like, I'm just following my intuition, and I just say yes to that. And it was really funny because I go, it's him and his wife and this other couple that I didn't know. They were just there on vacation and having a good time and tasting the wine. And so I sat for a few minutes and just kind of did some catch up with them and say, wow, I haven't seen you in, gosh, it's been since 2007, I think it was that I saw them last time. And so then I said, well, I'm going to go into the tasting house and grab a bottle of wine for my wife and for dinner or whatever. I go in there and I said, I'll have a bottle of the rosé. And I asked, give me 2 bottles of Syrah. I'll give them each a bottle to take home from Maui as a part of their vacation. This is a gift, and say, hey, thanks for coming on Kaikanani. Nice to meet you, that kind of thing. I said, great. And she says, okay, that's $156. I said, oh, it's like, oh, okay. So I put down my credit card, and then I go, wait, I say, hold on. You know what? Actually, we're members here. I think we have a membership through our company. And she was like, oh, and she goes, what's the name? I said, yeah. She looks it up. Oh yeah. Actually, you have a pickup. She goes, because every quarter there's a 6 bottles of wine that you get as a part of a membership. And she goes, yeah, it's been here for a month. And I go, oh, I didn't get the email. And she's like, oh, okay. And so she brings it. She goes, oh, hey, there's 2 bottles of Syrah and a bottle of rosé in there. I was like, and of course there is. And it was free, essentially. It was already paid for and everything. And the company paid for it. So I just walked out and I said, here you go. And I was walking in, and I see that as synchronistic, where anybody else go, was coincidence. I go, well, yeah, at this reactive response, that's coincidence. Yeah. But when you get to this intuitive response, it's not. You see, and everything looks that way. right?
Yeah.
Everything starts to look synchronistic. I mean, I'm talking about down to the littlest things, like,
All right. So I'm gonna give you a challenging question.
Yeah, go.
That I feel I know the answer to, but I want to hear your input of it.
Yeah.
So again, this kind of speaks a little bit to that when that woman said, "What do I do as a Black woman?" You have a white man at a pretty high level of conscious answering this question, right? So you have this kind of. So what do you say to? Okay, so I'm a poor person of color who's lived an oppressed or an abused life. I mean, you know me. You've been in my house. Like, my neighborhood is not your neighborhood, right? In my neighborhood, it's a regular thing.
I don't have a neighborhood. I'm on a farm. Yeah.
Right. But you live it, but your environment is one of wealth. It's one of influence. It's very white. It's all those kind of things, right?
Sure.
Like, so you have, as a white man that has influence, comfort, and resources, you live with a lot of space around you so that you can see these experiences, right? What do you say to someone who is seeking this, but they live in a space where they don't know where that next, they live in paycheck to paycheck, I get in some conversations sometimes with my daughter's best friend's mom. Like, we'll hang out and, drop the kids off, whatever. Well, she's, lives in literally in a 600 square foot house with 3 children, single mom. She's addicted to drugs, like all this kind of stuff. That's going on. It's not addicted to drugs. She's a compulsive user of certain drugs. What do you say to that? And if she's saying, well, I would love to be able to have that, like, how would you address that?
Yeah, how I'd address it is, it always goes back to what questions are you asking, and who are you?
Does this work for them?
Yes, of course it does. Yeah, but I would start with, like, well, what's your spiritual practice? Like, well, I don't have one. Well, okay, well, like, for the first thing that happens to someone is when they wake up, is that they realize, like I said, they come to soul consciousness, right? And that's just awareness of spirit, awareness of just something other than this physical form as reality. Their reality is expanded into a space of the unseen with the physical eyes, right? And all is as simple. If I'm in this fight or flight response, or I'm in this reactive response, when I close my eyes, nothing's changed. I just have my eyes closed. When I'm in this when I have a soul consciousness and I close my eyes, I go from outer awareness to inner awareness. I just do immediately. I just, blink, light turns around. It's like ding, and it shines on the inside. And I start to experience my inner reality as a separate and kind of beautiful reality that I can create and do whatever I want with. Right. So I can sit down and I can begin to, and I start to explore that space of soul consciousness, explore my soul, explore what that means to have a soul. Right. And you can do that anywhere, in any situation, anywhere you are. You can be as poor as it gets or be as wealthy as it gets. And if you understand, oh no, I'm not this body. I'm not identified with this body. This is a tool that I have. This is things, you know what I mean? Then things begin to switch. And honestly, like when you get to that point, like, things can go pretty fluid, pretty fast. And you can, and depending on your level of how identified are you with your brain, with your thoughts, this is who I am. I find that people that are what you could call type A personalities have a harder time with this part, because they are so intellectual and so good at, or they like their brains. They like how they work, and they often like their brains more than anybody else's brains. You know what I mean? They really like to be able to, well, I like how I think. And they take offense to the idea that we're telling them to stop thinking, stop identifying with their thoughts. They don't realize your personality is your personality, and you're going to keep that. It's going to be great. It's just going to be 10 times more powerful, 100 times more powerful, 1,000 times more powerful when you begin to stop identifying with your thoughts and saying that somehow that's reality for everyone. That is that's me. That's my brain is me. No. So the teaching is like, well, have you met your soul? And then we go, oh, what? And you go, well, that's the first step. The first step, do you know that you are a soul? You're not this body.
I think that's why you see people like them, like Deepak, can come off as callous at times. Right?
Yeah.
Even Jesus was like that, right? Where he was just like, let the dead bury the dead.
Mm-hmm.
Like, whoa, dude, come on, like his mom just died, man. Like, and he's just, and he, you know what I mean? And he's looking at the poor with compassion,
Yes.
but he's also going, they're lost in a story.
Yeah. And this was Roger's answer to this gal, this African-American gal, who was a sweetheart. But she and incredibly sincere, but she was angry too. Right.
Yeah,
and his reaction was very detached from that, very just like, and when he I mean, he went back and people are like, oh, you realize what you just did, right? And he's like, no, he's aloof in that way going, and they're explaining to him, he's like, oh shit, you know.
See, and I think that's the thing I'm kind of hinting at, is that it's really easy when you live in a place of such because he doesn't maybe know it, but he lives in such a place of such privilege, and you get caught in that space. It's very easy to even him, his ego is enlightened at some level, and so he loses awareness of most of the world's experience.
Yes, and so it's interesting because, but if we identify this way, he loses awareness internally of most people's internal experience. The external experience the same thing can happen. Jeff Bezos, really, there's no way for Jeff Bezos to have any real understanding of what it is to be poor. Even though at one point he can look back and remember being in his little apartment and working 20-hour days and coding, and he can remember all the stress around that. He can remember that, but it's been so long and over time where everything is so easy financially and everything like that you can't identify with that, and you can't understand. If you hang out with a group of billionaires, which I've done, they're the most unaware people in terms of what's really going on. And for them, life is amazing. Like, and they really go, and they're super optimistic. A lot of them. Life's incredible. Are you kidding me? Like, this world is amazing. And they see solutions to problems. And that's these people, like this reactive response of like, yeah, we can do anything. We can fix it. We can make that. We can create that. We can have that. We can do that. We can, you know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah. So
I think that's why there's some value in maybe living and intentionally living or placing yourself in spaces where you have to be reminded.
I would say on top, kind of actually even more than that, there's an essential nature to that. Once you get to this level, there's an essential nature in which you experience poverty, or you purposefully, but again, outer, inner, there's an essential nature to hanging out. This is where I'm at. A lot of people you see that come to soul consciousness, they first start to kind of become, I need to not hang out with these people or that people because they're toxic, or that their energy brings me down, and that kind of stuff. And you see that very much in new age circles and yoga circles. I just can't hang with that person because like their energy just brings me way down, and I just can't. And I go, if you're only hanging out with people at your level of consciousness, then you are going to become detached. And like I said, not saying that that's some like a bad thing. What it is,
it's not. But it is. There is an aloofness that sets in that. I love this. How Ken Wilber puts it. He talks about how each level of consciousness that we rise to transcends the former, but includes it. And if you lose touch with those former levels of consciousness, then I think your ability to affect the world tends to be diminished.
Yes,
you know what I mean.
Yes.
Like, you live in these fields that are really, really high. Amy and I have talked about that a lot, because over the last couple of years, we've gone from just struggling and changing and growing, and we're homeless ourselves and all this kind of stuff, to this point where the money's coming in and the careers, and we've had this like, so is this where we go and move to nice neighborhoods and drive nice cars and do all this kind of thing? And we're going, but we've been looking at this whole world going, maybe we don't.
Yeah.
Maybe we stay in the ghetto. Maybe we stay in this space, because there seems to be an interconnectedness to all the different levels.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And there's, and again, not being that there's a wrong answer to that question in the very dualistic mindset where you're like, there's a right answer and a wrong answer. There's not a wrong answer to that. It's really, are you following in terms of an intuitive response? I wanted to go because there's these other levels. There's a couple more levels of response. There's three.
I only got about 10 minutes left, and I realized like this, we might need to do a part 2 because this is a super rich.
I said, I've got. Let me go through these next levels of response. After intuitive response, there's the creative response. This is where we begin to embrace paradox, uncertainty. We embrace uncertainty. This is where true disruption. This is Deepak talking. This is where true disruption happens. Karmic connections. You see that when big problems in the world begin to be solved. Going from, where the wheel is invented, where, these things like massive disruption in karmic connections. after that, because even more, because there's what they call the
I think we
visionary.
put the cross of Christ in that space,
Yes.
right? Like,
Yeah, sure.
Is a very extremely disruptive. Yeah.
Right. The next one is the visionary response. He says that this is where we see a shift in cognitive abilities. He said foresight begins to happen, awakening, miracles, awakening of dormant potentialities. He said superhuman abilities sometimes. He said people being able to levitate and walk on water and that kind of stuff, this kind of thing.
Healing, miracles. Would
right. Yeah. And he said, and then he said the seventh and the highest level of response in this level of consciousness are this called the sacred response. Yeah. Being in love, like in love, seeing the whole universe as everything, in everything, and seeing it in everything and everything as one. And then he actually asked these other questions. He's like, okay, so who is God on these levels of consciousness? He said on the first, on fight or flight, God is the protector, the Old Testament God, right? Like with the hammer, he will protect his people. He said on the reactive, because that reactive response, the second level, this is the ego, this is super successful. Reactive God is the Almighty God, the and the rational God that really kind of works. And this is what I see in Christianity. Everything works out for those who love the Lord, kind of thing. It's going to work out because God is he's on your side as long as you're winning.
God is good. Yeah, my buddy
Fernando,
he's always like, God is great. Every time we talk, God is great. God is great.
Yeah. Like, that's
everything.
This thing.
God is great and everything is awesome.
Yeah, and it's the reactive God, because when things are bad, he's not saying that. Like things are going bad.
Well, even when it's bad, that's funny. Like even when things are bad, he says it even louder.
Right. But what it becomes is, if I say it louder, maybe he'll respond. This is why he calls him the reactive God, right? Yeah. He said on that next level, he talked about restful awareness of God. This is the God of peace. In restful awareness, God is the God of peace. And he said this is, he said Jesus in his teachings of God, this God of peace. On the intuitive level, we have God the Redeemer, right? Where God is actively healing and moving and changing. From the creative responses, we have God the Creator. We are co-creators with God, and God makes the new things and gives ideas and helps us create. On the visionary level, we talk about the God of miracles, and this is where crazy stuff is happening, where Jesus is like pow, 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 And then the sacred response, he says, God of pure being, I am. So he went through all kinds of questions then from these, and how these questions are answered at these different levels. Questions like, what kind of world did God create? Who am I? And it's just like over and over again going through these different levels and stuff. And it was really, I'm recording. Yeah, thank you. I'll edit that out. And it just continued to kind of blow everybody's mind until I couldn't even keep the notes going. I was like, I had to stop and just kind of listen. And
that's the kind of stuff where I would sit next to you at a retreat, like I wouldn't take one single ounce of notes.
Yeah, no, for me, it's important because I knew that we were going to do this, and I wanted to be able to communicate it better to a group of people understanding it. And so to wrap this up, what I want to do is I want to make sure people understand that wherever you're at and wherever we're all at, it's not about if your ego is saying, well, we've got to climb that ladder, we've got to get to unity consciousness. I remember experiencing that when I first learned these teachings and stuff, and I had experienced these other levels of consciousness, and I was trying to make sense of it. Because when I first went to White Raven, and a lot of people have read chapter 4, the Feels Like Redemption, and they've read my story, my first thing, I had a massive explosion that happened to me spiritually. And I had some trippy experiences that week, and it was a weird time.
It's like your vision gets blurred almost.
Yeah. But I was also like seeing angels and demons, and I was seeing all this crazy entities. But I was also like floating around. Like I had nothing. I was impervious the whole week to any, like 10 days. I was just kind of going.
You called me in that state. I was like, holy shit.
Yeah, it was a crazy experience. But I knew everything. I knew like my intuition was so peak that I couldn't like make a mistake. I was just kind of like, oh, I will touch this person on the shoulder, and it's because I should touch that person on the shoulder. And then that person will turn around and offer me a job, and I will say yes. And then I will end up this, and I would, and all these things were happening all the time. I was walking down the street, giving money to everybody. It was crazy. But we see that because if we are in that mode of spiritual understanding in which we're like, okay, so the point is to climb the ladder. And then I can hear Deepak going, no, like, no, that's not it, it comes down to these questions. What do you want? Right. Who are you? Who are you? Are you just a human body? Are you Dave Taylor? Or are you something more than that? Are you a soul? How do you identify yourself? Have you started to lose identification? When you start to let go of this human body as the only thing? What do you want? And then he said, the most important thing, what am I grateful for? Like, what are you grateful for? And I remember him saying at one point, he goes, if everybody could just understand one thing, he says, gratitude is the most powerful energy in the world. He says, love exists. And he goes, and it is super powerful. Because, but if you want to create things, he says, gratitude is the most powerful. Because spend 10 minutes a day, just spending in that gratitude energy for what you have now. And then all of your dreams will come true. He's like, and I remember just going, all right, so it's like what I tell people now is like, well, no, I really want to get to soul consciousness. Like, I really want to get to this other level of consciousness. What do I do? And I would say, spend time in gratitude. What are you thankful for? And if someone sits down and goes, well, I can't figure out what I'm thankful for. I go, well, then that's where you're at. That's the place to spend time at, because even breathing is something to be grateful for, and
I always call it the counter program. That is the counter program to whatever the ego is trying to do.
Explain that.
We run it. Well, I always talk about the ego I always equate the ego to this thing that has like certain floppy disks, and it's definitely a floppy disk. It has floppy disks with certain programs that it runs for people, and your ego will adopt certain programs, whatever. And I think there's nuance to that depending on the type of trauma you carry and that kind of thing. Like, well, run the porn program. I'm sure we have at least one of our listeners is using porn a lot right now, and it'll run the program, need to deal with the thing, but gratitude is a program. And it's literally a counter program. So like if we do healing, trauma gives the ego a lot of muscle. And I think healing is an important final thing. I think that people don't, honestly, teachers like Deepak, I don't think they talk about it enough, Now I've never sat at an intensive retreat before, but they talk a lot about truth, but there's little talk. I don't think there's much talk about shadow, about how trauma really works in the system. But when you begin to do some healing, eventually you just come to face the ego. At first, it's a lot of energy work and it's a lot of ego work. And then eventually it's much more ego work than it is energy work. And it's facing that thing. And I get people all the time going, well, when my ego says this thing, what should I say back to it? I go, gratitude. Gratitude's the counter program. And the ego doesn't know what to do with that. Yeah. So like I got a guy right now he's a professional soccer player, and he's just started to experience some pretty solid, almost semi-permanent separation from ego. He's like solidly moving. He's in soul consciousness. And he's like, well, I can still hear me ego talking, but it's talking from about 12 feet away, and it doesn't seem to have an effect on me. He goes, but I'd love to just shut up. I'm like, well, now we just hit it with a counter program. And I'm like, it starts going, oh shit, you lost your starting position. You still lost your starting. He's never going to get it back. I go, just counter program. Gratitude, just move into gratitude. And people who've done worship, Christians who've done a lot of worship, it's pretty easy. You just go, remember the worship service, you just start flowing. Thank you, Spirit. Thank you for this lesson. Thank you for this thing that I'm learning. Thank you for, and I was showing that, and he's like, whoa, that's kind of awesome. Like, yeah, because the vibration is freaky high, and it just, and then eventually the ego just goes fine, and it just sits back, but it is a program. It's like it's a program.
Yeah. And in fact, you can, from a, when this again, Deepak going, it's all programming. He says, and we get to choose now, once we become very aware, he says, we get to choose what programming we spend our energies on. He says, because the brain is a very useful tool for running a program. It's a piece of software. You can just run that. And he talked a lot about software, right? And he did talk about trauma. He talked about observation of the body and the sensations in the body a lot. Is when we find the sensations of the body. He doesn't talk about processing in a way like White Raven Center would do or something like that, or going back, but he did mention it. He says that there are healing therapies to go and to relive the trauma. But for him, and I've heard the same thing from Ram Dass and other spiritual teachers, is like when you get to that level, when you're at, they're all stories. So trauma is a story, and they just go, and they can just go peek and delete it. Like they don't have to process it. But there are so many people.
But we still have to acknowledge the physics of it is when they do that, it's because they don't have blockages to it leaving the system.
No, exactly.
But it still does leave the system.
It's just instant. It's an instant delivery. For a guy like Deepak, everything's a story, and he can delete it and he can play it, and it was funny. At one point he walked in and he was like trying to clear his throat. My throat, because he'd been on a plane for 13 hours. And then he was like in an air conditioned room, and he goes, it's air conditioned. He says, turn off the air conditioning. And people are like, no. It's like 85 degrees outside. And they're like, he goes, you don't need it. And everybody's going, no, the white people in here really need it. It's like, and he's like, but for him, like, he was going, no, we don't need that. and it's just a different, you can see, like I said, he had illustrated that with the story on the airplane where he's like, no, I'm on the ride in Disneyland, it's all just a big sandbox he gets to play in, which is great. And I think that honestly, like, for me, that's kind of where I'm slowly been moving into, where in my meditation practice, it was extremely helpful for me in my meditation. Like this morning, I was up at 5 a.m. meditating, and it was easy. It was so lovely and so easy, because what the big thing for me at this retreat was that I went into it and I set my intention at the beginning. I actually wrote it down in my book. I wanted my practice. It was very simple. I was like, what do I really want here? What's my intention for this retreat? And it was, I said, to lock in my spiritual practice in a meaningful way. And it was exactly what he said. I wanted it to be the top priority. And I found now that I have set it in that space where it's like, oh, no, nothing. I woke up at 5 a.m. Bink on the dot without alarm. I got straight out of bed. I walked over and I found like, oh, now I'm enjoying this, because I was overthinking it. I used to always be like, am I doing this right? Am I doing this right? And he was like, if any question comes, just observe it and let it go. Observe it and let it go. Observe it and let it go. Stop judging yourself. And I started noticing, oh, I'm so busy trying to figure out if I'm doing it right that I'm not observing what's happening and just saying, oh, look what's happening. Like I go, oh, look at my mind go. It's thinking about this, or it's thinking about that. And once I started doing that, I just stopped worrying about what I was doing.
You remember JP was like that to me. We asked him, well, what do you do when you miss your practice? He goes, I don't.
Right. And that's exactly what Deepak said. Deepak says the exact same thing. He was like, I simply don't. Like, I don't. Yeah. It's my highest priority. And then JP was the exact same way. And I remember when Deepak said it, the moment he said that, JP's like, well, I don't. It's my highest priority. I think for people that aren't basic, they're trying to meditate, but they're not getting the benefit from it because they wake up stressed out.
Yeah.
They're the ones that haven't learned that simple idea of kind of letting go is the point. Like when you're in meditation, like something comes to you, you have to have that skill of being able to let something go. Yeah. Like you just go, let go of the need to derive what you think would be a benefit from this, and let go of the needs, let go of all every bit of it, and just be. And like this morning, I was in and I was just observing my breath, and I had this mantra going, and then my mind drifted, and I started thinking about the kids' school or something going on at the school. And instead of like I used to get back to the mantra, it was that response. Instead, it was like, oh, look, my mind wandered. But then I immediately was like, oh, before that, you were like totally locked in for like 4 or 5 minutes. That's pretty good. I was like, that's amazing. Like, okay, let's go back to that. Okay. And it was just this totally unjudgmental thing for myself, and it was so kind. I was being so kind to myself in meditation that I saw also, and I dropped way in, and I felt like I, went all alpha wave and that to me is, I can say,
I want to say something. I want to comment on that because it is let's give context. David has been doing intensive work on himself, transforming himself for 13 years now, 14 years.
In 2009, December 2009. So.
And what you're speaking to is a reality that is not easily attained. And
no,
that's important
to
understand. And because people, there's a lot of at least 2 of the 3 listeners right now are probably going, well, God, how do I get there? Most people that I deal with, they're coming in and they're thinking the thoughts that are entering their mind aren't, oh, what's my kids doing for school today? It's things like, I think I want to die.
Yeah.
That's where shadow stuff is really, really important. That's why actually doing shadow work. So like understanding that at first it's not this easy. It's just
no. But it's also not the thing you're doing. Like if you're listening to this and you're going, man, I'm in this place of, if you're in that fight or flight response, or even if you're in that reactive response where you're just trying to get to that next level or whatever, then just know this, wherever you're at, that's not the end place. If you're in fight or flight, then you are not living your life. Heal. Yeah, it's time to heal. And it's time to change the programming and the stories as well. I mean, you can immediately start to, if you just can believe what we're saying and go, okay, I believe Seth and Dave are saying that stress is a story. It's not real. And you can just close your eyes and you can begin breathing and start feeling the stress that's contained in your body and start understanding, oh, that's attached to a piece of programming. And I'm experiencing that as a circular reality because that programming is so stuck in my head, and it's attached to trauma and it's attached to other things. Even people that are not dealing with intense trauma, but are just have a stressful job. Yeah. Like our cousin.
I want to go back to one of the questions that was asked to Deepak that, what Deepak answered was true. But it was that detached aloofness, in a sense, when the guy said, why do I have a hard time finding time to do my meditation? Because I really want to do it. And I fully understand that it's the most important thing. Yeah. But I have a hard time finding time to do it. And Deepak said, it's just not a priority to you. Yeah. That's true.
Yes.
But there are complex reasons as to why this man is in that space. And that's an important thing to understand, because, we can say, well, he hasn't suffered enough yet. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I got a guy coming, just literally starting a new set of 12 sessions with me. I've worked with him many times before, and we've literally for years have been dancing around. And he's in it. He's like, hey, my relationship's in good space, and I'm in pretty good space, but for some reason I can't say no to things, and I keep overloading myself to the point where I'm just always way too busy. And I'm like, and he's like, and I want to know why. Yeah. I'm like, well, if you understand that that's coming from a deeply subconscious place, I could just go, well, your priorities are out of order, obviously. Because I'm going to go in there and go, well, we need to quit this and this. And he'll go, well, I can't.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. No, yeah. But
there's a complexity, there's a deep complexity into how ego and trauma works that cause us to, this is the Pauline question. This is why I love Christianity. Christianity is a super rich, the entire New Testament is a super rich wrestling with the emergence of Eastern truth into Western being a person. And it's the attempt to smash these things into one place. That's what the cross of Christ was. We're going to smash the fully human into the fully God and wrestle with it. That's the gift that Judaism has given us. Yeah. Is how do you mesh these two things?
Yeah.
And people all the time get lost in that. Well, I'm going to do the full Eastern truth. But Jesus said, "Be in the world, but not of the world," and that is our task as Christians. We were charged. I think, in a sense, Christianity is charged with trying to bring those two worlds together.
Yeah, and it's. Maybe it's a Middle Eastern form. It was, the American version of that is just it's bastardized, Western dualistic, battle ready,
extremely primitive,
primitive kind of thing. Yeah. I think the vast majority of Christianity is in fight or flight response. That's why 80% of them voted for a guy like Donald Trump, who is a fight or flight political candidate. And
in no way, shape, or form anything close to anything resembling even a slightly Protestant real Christian.
Well, he's certainly not resembling anybody who would pursue the teachings of Christ as real things to apply to your life, right?
Yeah, or even the basic moral truths of the church.
Even basic stuff. Yeah. And but anyway, I guess to wrap it up here, I definitely the retreat was an incredible experience. Maria was there with me. My wife was there with me, which was really powerful. It was a really neat experience. And we had the ability, because we've been on this path for some time, and I've been meditating with Deepak's apps for like 10 years. And I've read everything he's written in the last 20 years. I kind of understood quite a bit of the material and kind of the things. And I was kind of, I guess, maybe further along. And so for us, it was in a very peaceful experience. I could see where it was very disruptive for a lot of people. And I think a lot of people that spent a lot of money to get to Maui and then be there and didn't find Valhalla, and then and then all of a sudden
their egos and creating this giant.
You saw people. It was really interesting. The Tuesday in that morning, Deepak he led us, before he did the Q&A, he led us in a 45-minute meditation. I start breathing, and I'm doing my own mantra in my head. It's just, you're in this room and it's just silent, and there's like hundreds of people and it's silent. And the energy was just chaos. It was incredible. It was the weirdest experience to go into the same people you've been meditating with for 4 days or whatever. It was just chaos. And everybody was upset. You could feel people upset and feel angry and stuff. I wasted all this money, and here I am, and I wasted all this money, and that kind of thing.
And a lot of them giving attention to their internal experience, probably at a deeper level than they ever have, and Pandora's box is opening up a little bit, and
it was that for sure. And then people were getting up because they got to go catch flights, and they were leaving, and people were leaving, and And I was like, it's tough. It's a tough thing for people to, it's a tough thing to teach on a big scale like that. It really, really is. It's like, it's a different thing if there was a dozen people just sitting with Deepak and we were all learning and we were able to kind of talk and then us go together and help each other integrate and understand the experience and stuff like that.
Right.
Marie and I kind of had that built in because we were, like in the mornings, like they had morning meditation, like a couple mornings we're like, hey, I don't feel like meditating. I feel like walking,
Yeah,
okay, great. So we walked
yeah.
4, 5, 6 miles, and Wailea's got this beautiful walk along the whole waterfront. And we just walked and talked and we processed and integrated and helped each other.
You can jump in the ocean anytime you want.
Yeah, that kind of thing. You know what I mean? And it, obviously because it's our home, it was a very different experience because we know every resort and every restaurant and everything.
Sure.
And even the last day, we brought our kids down. We had them skip school on the Tuesday and stay the night on Monday night. And we all went together to dinner at a family. We walked to another resort and had dinner, just the 4 of us. Friend of ours was a server there, and it was just wonderful. It was this wonderful experience. But I did feel that I was like, part of me was just kind of compassionate. That compassionate part of me that helped create this, my pilgrimage thing, was a part of me going, I wish I could kind of grab some of these people and just give them a hug and go, hey, thanks for coming to Maui, and can I show you a really simple thing? And what I wanted to do was grab everybody. And I wish they had done this. I wanted to grab everybody and I wanted to walk them down to the beach. And I wanted to walk, just wade into your shins on the ocean and just close your eyes and just feel the island, feel the bass note of the island, just the humming, and let that just soak up into your body. And that simple teaching, no matter where you are, even if you live in the urban jungle in Chicago, go find a park, go find a tree, go find some space and just sit with that for a while and let some of that do its work on you. There was a missed opportunity there. I think, I even found the yoga instructor who was wonderful. She was a wonderful lady, and found her. And I told her, I said, we were doing these morning yoga sessions out there and with the ocean, this epic backdrop and Molokini behind it. And then Haleakala, the sun rising. It was just awesome. Right. And I was like, I think you're missing an opportunity. She said, oh yeah, what? And I said, well, the island it's got its own thing. I said, the Hawaiians really understood this. I said, we talked about mana and Daina, and we talked about some of the spiritual understanding of Mauka and Makai and the way that the Hawaiians understood the island. And I said, I just think that people came here to Maui and you're missing an opportunity to kind of to help them tap into the island a little bit and experience that. I said, I think a lot of them want to, but they didn't do that. So I wrote a nice piece of feedback for that. So anyway, if anybody wants to come to Maui, by the way, if anybody's listening, the 3 of you want to come to Maui, you can come and we can. We got
to do a retreat.
I know.
My pilgrimage retreat is due. We got to do this. You're getting me going. Like, I'm just going, there's no reason we shouldn't do this at some point.
I know. When we have,
we just do it. We find a space and we just go, hey, all you got to do is get here. We got.
I know the space.
10 spots.
It's a place. It's a retreat center. It's right over here. It's called Lemuria. It's on Baldwin Avenue up from Paia, and that's the spot. It's got everything. Dude, it's got
we got to do a
yoga center. It's got a yoga room.
Because we can take everything that you're talking about and bring it to these guys, and then integrate it into like we did in Alaska. We integrated.
Maybe our 3 listeners can help us organize this.
Yes, 3 listeners. Contact
we need some people to just that know how to organize and logistics, because it's logistics, man. Like, this is a massive logistical project that you're talking about. It's not massive. If we had we're going to have 15 guys or 10 guys or whatever come.
Well, if we did it in a week, we said if we did it in a space that's anywhere near restaurants too, we can just go, hey, we're just going to eat as we go. That's
Lemuria. Lemuria has a built-in restaurant and kitchen. I'm telling you, it's complete there. And it's just like a quarter mile from Paia too. So,
Yeah. I don't know. We'll talk about it. Some conversation going.
It was good.
Thank you.
It was good. Yeah. Thanks to everybody for listening. And
I want one last thing. Can I close it with a thing?
Yeah. Close it.
When you talked about what everybody was experiencing, I always bring the Jesus teachings into this, because Jesus said at one point, he said, I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. Right. And when he said that, and that's what Deepak did. When you talk about what everybody was experiencing, they'd had a sword run through them.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Deepak understood very well what was going to happen.
And he's not sorry for it. He doesn't apologize.
He's not sorry for it. He recognizes that that's what's needed, because what's needed in our culture is a sword, and peace follows that death.
Yeah.
And that's a really live interpretation of that teaching.
Yeah.
And what we understood, because it was never about making all of us feel all warm and gushy inside. And I'm guessing most of the people that came there thought that that's what they would experience.
Yeah. And it's a tough thing. It's a tough thing to communicate, and then and then let people have their experience. You know.
Yeah.
Epic,
all right,
man.
brother.
Good.
Dude, we could talk for hours about this.
Yeah,
Man.
I think I'm gonna
to our
just
3
throw
listeners.
this.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think I might just throw this somewhat unedited. I thought that we actually did a pretty good job.
Do it. Do it, man. I only swore like once. So fine.
Yeah, but if we throw this out, and then I'll just let people kind of digest it. I also got a conversation Ken Lowry and I had that he recorded for his YouTube channel and stuff like that. He gave me permission to put that up as a My Pilgrimage podcast. So I'll put that out and schedule that for pretty quick here too. So
nice.
Awesome, man.
Okay, bro.
Later.
Later.
Bye.